Good afternoon and welcome to UK Column Live from our Plymouth, England studio. I'm sorry about the slight delay there. Not our fault, of course. 1 o'clock, it's 6th of December 2013, and I'm delighted to have with me in the studio Steven Seagal, Patrick Henningsen. Some of you are noticing the similarity there, so it's good to have a famous media man in the studio. And of course, behind the scenes, Mike Robinson. And I think we've got a pretty impressive news lineup today. First of all, we just say that we'd like to express our sympathy for all the people who've been hit with trouble as a result of the weather, flooding, whatever it's been. So we're very sorry that it's happened, and we feel for all the people that have probably got a really bad start to the Christmas holiday period. Well, what's going on in the country? Amazing things, and really the focus of today's news is going to be what is actually going on around us, the propaganda, how it's being driven, and we'll also be homing in again on the suffering in Syria. But Mike's going to kick us off, I think, with house prices.
Yes, once again, more indications that people are concerned about house price rises. I'm not really going to dwell on this too much other than just to say that the BBC and the FT warning of the return of a housing bubble. Remember, this is not a housing bubble, it's a debt bubble, and it is making a return. Actually, the comments that the report that we had on a couple of days ago regarding the securitization of rents as well as the securitization of mortgages. A couple of other people have picked that up and are suggesting that we're looking at a financial crash sometime in 2016. Well, I would say that seems like a reasonable timescale to me. So, I mean, it could happen literally any time, but certainly by then, I would say if this kind of nonsense keeps going, we've got to get these banks split up and get the problem dealt with, get the debt dealt with. Yeah.
Can I just comment on this, Mike, real quick? You talked about the securitization of rents. A lot of people aren't aware that in Spain, a similar program with the banks has been going on for around 6 years, where the bank is involved in securing the rent. So the deal is done, a three-way contract between the bank, the landlord, and the tenant, and that's obviously fees exchanged monthly for that. And so you can't rent a property in Spain without one of these bank deals. So the similar programs are already going on in Europe. And Mike, you might want to comment on this. This talk, obviously, it sounds like their Bank of England statements as well last week, it sounds like they're priming the public for an interest rate rise.
Yes.
In the very near future. Some are saying the summer of 2014 may be when the penny drops. They're already saying that house prices are too high. An end to cheap money, says the governor of the Bank of England. So we might see a little shock therapy.
Massive pressure on people with loans and mortgages, which of course is what the state is trying to do.
Yeah, this is the bail-in policy. They will raise interest rates. There will be more foreclosures. That will give hedge funds like Blackstone and the others that are getting involved in this rental market the opportunity to buy up foreclosed property for a song, and this is going to happen in the US and in the UK. And so, the bail-in policy doesn't just apply to savings; it also applies to pensions, to property. We know what the Agenda 21 policy is, and that is to remove private property ownership, and that is being implemented through this financial crash, which continues and never seems to end because they never deal with it. And why do they never deal with it? Because they want it to be worse the next time than it was the last. And that's what we're looking at imminently.
So whilst the horrible reality of the manipulation of the international monetary market goes on, of course, at home, what we're dealing with is pure propaganda of a variety of forms pushed out with the mainstream media. So let's have a little look through the sorts of things that the newspapers are saying and what it really means. And this, of course, is a nice emotive article here, which is about a veteran that's lost his benefits. So straight out of the Express, veteran loses his job seeker benefits for selling poppies. So because the man is honest, he declared what he was doing. that was enough for him to lose his benefits. Now, what is interesting is how the public reacts to this. It's ridiculous, or as one person commented, this is an absolute disgrace and a slap in the face for an ex-serviceman who sacrificed a small amount of his time to raise money for elderly veterans. But this is not really what it's about. This is what it's about. We are seeing decisions being made by people within the public sector, our civil servants, but now, of course, much of that outsourced. We are seeing people making decisions which are absolutely not common sense. They can be very cold and callous, and we know that this is coming as a result of the leadership and management training which these people are being put through. And this is particularly true of the Department of Work and Pensions, because we've got many people in that unfortunate organisation that are telling us their colleagues are changing in personality and behaviour. And as we move through the news today, we are going to be trying to give you as much information as possible to support what we're actually saying here. So let's move on. We've got the Express talking about rebel MPs pressing for laws to limit new EU migrants. This is one of the men being put forward. Well, this cannot be true, because basically we know that control of the movement of people through the EU borders, all of the decision-making process is now with the EU. So our MPs at the moment can bluster, they can put up smokescreen. We've called it a puppet show here. Whatever they do, the truth of the matter is that treasonous politicians have actually given away rights over our border. So we shouldn't be getting angry at immigrants. The solution is we've got to replace these treasonous MPs if we're going to do anything about solving the problems that Britain's got, whether it's fraudulent international bankers or it's to do with how many people can reasonably live in the country and what our infrastructure can cope with. The Telegraph decided to comment on the NHS. Very interesting one here. Cancer, 2 in 3 patients will survive by the end of the decade. The number of people dying from breast, prostate and bowel cancer will almost halve by 2020, new figures suggest. But of course, what we've got going on here is David Cameron destroying the NHS in order to maximise profit. So what does this headline really mean? Well, this is the reality, that actually what we are talking about is even by 2020, when surely we should have made considerable progress in saving people's lives, they're actually boasting that 1 in 3 patients will die by the end of the decade. So David Cameron's policy, get in there, destroy the NHS, of course, destroy the proper care facilities within that organisation and maximise profits for presumably his friends. Mike showed some interesting and unpleasant pictures from Westminster yesterday. Here are the happy people gathered around the autumn budget. These are the superior intellects that we have been foolish enough to allow to govern our lives, and the Mirror picks up on it. And this was their statement. George Osborne knows nothing about your lives and he cares even less. I don't think this is quite right. This is the journalist. I don't think this man actually understands what he's seeing, that these politicians know exactly what they're doing. Well, he's right, they don't care about our lives, but they intend to deal with our lives by collapsing our country and infrastructure around us, and indeed collapsing our health. But it is quite remarkable how many of the mainstream journalists have become very lazy. They're sucking information off the internet. They're doing no real investigative journalism themselves. And the net result is that they then produce more articles where, well, I think they're believing their own rhetoric. I don't know whether you'd agree with that. Self-perpetuating.
Self-referential, self-reverential as well. Both.
Well, it continues. We've got a bit more from the Mirror here. Very nice cartoon, but what they're trying to say is that David Cameron has been stealing ideas from Ed Miliband. Well, of course, this is utter nonsense. because these men are working together. They are working under common purpose. So there's a charade of left and right, but the reality is that they know what they're doing. But here's another journalist, Paul Routledge, who has absolutely no idea what's really happening in politics, because he is not getting out and digging into the reality of what these guys are doing. We've got a little bit of a focus on the Mirror today. It was the Independent yesterday, I think, so we always spread ourselves around the paper over the week. But here we go with the Mirror. Cow Chaos, brilliant headline. Cow Chaos as beast runs down the motorway in 5-mile chase, then police shoot it dead. Well, we had a bit of comment in here. This is what they said in the article. The spooked beast was finally cornered on a local golf course. Sadly, it was humanely shot. I love that expression. It was humanely shot amid fears it was heading towards nearby schools, which were due to let out. This is it, really. We're now so terrified of a terrified cow that it has to be shot.
It's a calf, isn't it? It's not even a full-grown cow.
It looks like a bullock to me, probably, but this is mental reframing of the police. We've now got police in the mentality, it's a cow.
No, it's actually a terrorist.
You think, what?
It's a terrorist.
In disguise, in a woolly coat.
The cow was threatening to terrorize the local community, and the police did the proper thing, which was to use lethal force to put down the terrorist threat.
Yeah.
I don't know why you can't see that, Brian.
Well, I did hear that the police had told it several times to stand still and put its hooves in the air, but it refused to do it, so they shot it. We can laugh about this, but at the end of the day, we are seeing our civil servants, in this case the police, making extraordinary decisions. Why? Because they actually believe what's in their head. So just think about it, that a cow goes runabout. In the old days, a few people would have cornered the thing, rounded it up. Now we've got to shoot it. It was probably shot by a police marksman with an automatic weapon just to make sure. We will be next. So if you want to make sure the state gets its way, we need the mainstream press to toe the party line. And we bring you back to this terrible story of the Italian mother who is sectioned and then given a cesarean in order for the state to take her baby. And the Independent here has done a beautiful smokescreen article. It wasn't Essex Social Services, it was the NHS to blame. So now we're not too sure who was to blame. It wasn't us, Gov, it was the NHS. And we've asked the question, has the Independent any idea how these lying agencies work together to take children? Because if you talk to the mothers and fathers, not only do they tell you, they produce the paperwork and voice recordings and video recordings to show a British state machine to steal children. But here we've got the young journalist, Emily Duggan, and well, she's done, from what we can see, no real research to challenge the authorities as what's going on. And let's look at why she says we should be relaxed about this case. Well, the article ends, the mother's comments are chilling, but there is some compelling evidence that the court was not as inhuman as has been assumed. The closing remarks of Justice Newton's adoption judgment give perhaps the best indication. In a message to Mrs. Pachiri's daughter, he said, "If in later life P reads this judgment, as she may well do, I hope that she will appreciate that her mother that her mother in particular loved her and wished for her to return to live with her and to bring her up. It's not her fault, nor P's, that was not possible, and that a predictable home could only be secured by way of adoption. P should know that the mother very much wished to parent her and bring her up, and I hope that that is some small comfort both to the mother and also baby P." So this young journalist, she looks as though she's just out of school, says that these remarks by the judge show that the court was not as inhuman. What planet is this woman on?
Well, she's saying that the court was compassionate, and that they were looking out for the interests of the mother and the child.
Is there a bit of sheep coming into this?
All I can say, Brian, is that 20 years ago, if this incident happened 20 years ago, there would have been somebody sacked at the head of either the local health or the NHS.
Yeah.
Someone would have been sacked, possibly criminal charges.
Yeah.
Maybe a minister as well might have ended up in the bin for that. And today, in 2013, this should tell you a lot about the political climate surrounding our institutions, and specifically involving childcare. And clearly, they want to suppress this story to kind of make it a non-story. This is a huge story.
I believe that this story is so big that they've had to send in Judge Mumby. At the moment, Judge Mumby's got himself some very good press because he's the man saying there's got to be changes in the family court. But let's remember, this decision was made in the Court of Protection. I think the state has been so spooked by the public reaction that they've had to send in a heavyweight, Judge Mumby, to calm it down, to shut it down. And if we could just bring her back on screen, Mike, so that we can actually see this lady. Here's this young journalist. I would guess that she's quite a nice lady, but unbelievably naive. She's probably made a few phone calls to Essex. Were you bad? No, we were very good. And she writes it down. But the result is that this is Nazi Germany type action just being brushed under the carpet.
Yeah, I mean, look, the other thing is the reason they would like to suppress this story is because if this has happened here, how many, Brian, how many other times in the country?
Thousands.
Thousands of times, perhaps.
Yeah.
We don't know. But the more press that comes to this particular story, the more people are going to ask questions, and other people are going to come forward with similar stories.
Yeah.
So this is one step away from the Ravensbourne.
Yes, absolutely.
Houses. You know, for people to think that this is acceptable in the 21st century is beyond the pale.
Yeah.
It's one of the most shocking.
Well, I'm going to say on camera today that John Hemming, of course, is constantly put forward as the Lib Dem MP that's the saviour of families and the family courts. The UK column challenge to Mr. Hemming is call a press conference, invite to it all of the distressed mothers and fathers on your books. We will bring along the parents on our books. And let's get the BBC and the mainstream media in a hall with the parents and the evidence so that this country really knows the scandal of child trafficking by the British state. That's our challenge to MP John Hemming, and we will hold our breath. Or maybe not. Well, how is all of this madness being driven? We come back to applied behavioural psychology, and we are going to run this theme over several weeks because this is one of the most important areas to understand. Here's the little term nudging, and to give you an example, this is the sort of letter you can get if you need to renew your tax disc on your car. So the little post-it note is part of the government's document. This is the bit I'm talking about. And this is absolute applied behavioural psychology. It's nice, it's nudging, it's just saying don't forget to remind you to renew your car tax. But within the nudging, of course, is another level of psychology, because if we have a look at this bit, what it's also pushing you towards is that you need to do this online. We want you to be using your computer to go through on an online system if you want to renew your tax disc. We don't want you to give that work to your local post office. We want to encourage you, nudge you to go through. So the government tells us that its psychological work is all nice, it's designed to make our lives easier, it's a little bit of a gentle nudge. But is it? Well, we've shown this document many times, and this document is absolutely key because this is the mind space where the government is really opening up about what it has been doing with our minds for some years, with millions and millions of pounds of government money invested. This is the nasty stuff. This is not nudging. This is dangerous political reframing. This is the sort of stuff that gets policemen without thinking to actually shoot people covered in fuel with tasers and then express surprise when they actually burn to death. So who's around this little network? Well, of course, we've got to come straight into David Cameron. We've got to come straight into Eric Pickles. This is the man who says that the government shouldn't waste money on common purpose. But of course, he ignores the fact that his leader, King David, is absolutely common purpose. Francis Maude, the man who said he was standing up for transparency, he's refused to release the documents and the emails around the insider dealing between the Cabinet Office and common purpose. Not much transparency there. Ken Clarke, of course, the man who is busy working to close down the courts even further. This man, a lot of people don't know about him, but he's a French applied psychology expert. He was previously working in the private office of Sarkozy, and he has met on many occasions with senior government members to discuss joint applied behavioural psychology in UK and France. Well, here he is, the man at the centre of the Leveson attempt for the state to gain control of the press, Sir David Bell, and his number two, Julia Middleton. This is the political charity Common Purpose, working in a very dangerous political manner in the background, and of course itself using applied behavioural psychology. Sir Bob Kerslake, head of the Civil Service, also Common Purpose. David Halpin, another expert on behavioural matters, an advisor to the government. And Gus O'Donnell, previous head of the Civil Service, who was absolutely involved in the setup of this pernicious applied behavioural manipulation. This is at the core of it. If there is anybody out there who still doesn't understand that David Cameron's big society has not disappeared, it's not failed, it's actually being rammed home by the day, but you've got to know where to look at it. And we need to go to the big society network, and we certainly should be focusing in on The Guardian. What is the underlying ideology? Well, it's Marxist Saul Alinsky, and if anybody fails to believe us on this, go and have a look at the Tory political documents, which clearly state they're going to use Saul Alinsky doctrine, as does Labour's under Ed Miliband. Mike?
Yeah, unfortunately we can't go and look anymore because they took it all down from the website.
Well, we'll make sure that the UK column gets that up, because I'm delighted to say we hold copies of what was originally posted concerning Saul Alinsky. So even though they've tried to hide it, the truth's got a habit of coming to the surface. And of course, we've flagged up this sort of thing before. So at the moment, we've got an excellent article, Common Purpose in Your Locality, which you can get from the UK website. If you haven't read this yet, we encourage you to, because you need to understand the sheer scale of the government's manipulation of people's minds. Is it real? Well, what more can I say? It's so real that the government is already selling this technology to both Australia and the United States. So here he is, Mr. Transparency himself, Francis Maude, and we can see what he's up to. This is another document highlighting what's going on, the big society. And if we get into this, there was some dialogue, but what we're saying is about a Home Secretary who does want to have revolutionary change. Not my words, this is in the government's document. And if we go through it, we're talking about Ken Clarke being a Maoist. And again, we're saying it's going to take another year or two, the final sentence, on implementing this revolution. So these people are absolutely telling us what they're about. And if we know where to look, it's very easy to see. I think actually this is where your research dovetailed in very nicely, Mike.
Yeah, because of course this is one of these new community organising groups. This is the Big Lottery Fund now pumping 150 million pounds in to support the development of, quote, sustainable community-led enterprises across England, and this is an initiative called Power to Change. It's a new initiative, they say, which will invest 150 million sustainable community-led enterprises across England, delivered by an independent trust established next year. So I'm not quite sure what the definition of an independent trust is, but there you go. I say that in the sense that I'm not quite sure how it will be independent, because I'm quite certain the trust will have trustees who are far from independent. One of the other organisations that I wanted to highlight was this one. The NEF is, they say, the UK's leading think tank promoting social, economic and environmental justice. Their purpose is to bring about a great transition, as they call it, to transform the economy so that it works for people and the planet. But when you go and look at where the money's coming for this, you get the usual places, all the various trusts, the Network for Social Change, European Commission, Freshfield Foundation, the Ford Foundation, Nesta, the Tudor Trust, who else is there? Barrow Cadbury Trust, the Royal Academy of Engineering, okay, but then we've got, of course, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Well, that's the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. All the usual suspects there. These are people or organisations that are all pushing the common purpose ideology.
Mike, if I may, I just see there about a third of the way down, you've got Nesta and the Cabinet Office. So actually, this is a government organisation. Well,
it's a government-funded organisation, yeah. And this is, of course, the major problem now that we live in a participatory democracy. And I put that in quotes. We're not living in a representative democracy anymore, and 90% of these charities are operating, being funded either through these types of foundations or directly by government, actually. So, in fact, this is government policy being pushed out to the lowest level in society, as we have already highlighted. And this is the Great Transition Project. The Great Transition team combines the work of research teams across NEF with the macroeconomic case for a rapid transition to an economy which is socially just and maximises well-being within environmental limits. And of course, that sounds all very nice, but it's not really what they're about. This is about pushing behavioural change, behavioural economics down to the lowest level in society. It's part of the big society agenda.
And, the whole thing about community organizing, if you actually look up the definition of community organizing, it's a person, group of people within a community who want to organize a community to improve the lives of the citizens. And so they will promote a positive change, but they've also have to also show a negative as well. In other words, what would be the negative result if this positive thing doesn't happen? Now, that's coming from a community towards the state. What we're seeing now in 2013, and we're seeing this in the United States as well as Britain, we're seeing the government taking that community organizing and pushing it at the people. And obviously, what is the negative there? Well, the negative has to be a penalty, or it has to be some kind of fear-based mechanism. This is a very, very dangerous application. So they've weaponized the government through charitable trust foundations, and also the government itself is attempting to weaponize the concept of community organizing. And I can't tell you how dangerous, what a dangerous road that is to go down.
Well, we've got a lot more on this, Patrick, and South Wales is producing some very, very interesting information where you're seeing this lot drilling down to the absolute local level, your local community centre. Surprisingly, while a lot of institutions around the country haven't got money, we're seeing sums of money, £400,000, £600,000 appearing for local community centres. And then when the investigation's done into who the people are around this, you come back into community organisers. So we're really setting the scene at the moment, but if we drill down into it, and your choice of words there, it's a weapon. This is absolutely a weapon, which is, of course, what Saul Alinsky was talking about, because he's said anything is justifiable to achieve the political end. So if a few people are going to get hurt, Alinsky wasn't bothered, and I can't imagine that Cameron or Miliband are too worried, or even Mr. Clegg, of course. Well, we're going to move on to Syria, and one of the things that we want to bring people's attention onto is that whilst the mainstream media may have dropped Syria, of course the violence in the country goes on, and innocent men, women and children are suffering. We've got a slide here, if we can manage that one. This really sums it up. Children destitute and on the street, and you can tell from the way that this, I think it is a young lad, is curled up. He's obviously very cold. But what's actually gone on here? Well, the fun and excitement has gone out of the war. So the BBC has literally abandoned the children of Syria. I think it's that cynical. We've had a report in again talking about the number of civilian deaths in Syria yesterday. Now we're presenting these raw, effectively, as they're given to us. And we showed yesterday that, of course, there are a number of different sources for statistics, but we're going to take these as correct. So we're talking about another 51 people dying yesterday, and they're being killed by the fighting across the board. But we're always getting reports here at the moment of the number of people who actually have died as the result of torture. And you can see from the second paragraph there that we're dealing in trouble which is spread right the way across Syria. I'm going to hand over to you, Patrick, but I just wanted to bring this man in. This is Mr. Cohen. He's one of the top BBC directors, and of course he's been in the news recently. He's upset that people are criticising the BBC, and it's adversely impacting on staff morale. So the BBC was programme after programme after programme when they thought they were going to be able to get some exciting film shots of cruise missiles taking off and bombs exploding in Syria. They were primed. They had got millions of pounds of money. Now we've got the raw facts, which is the innocent civilians and particularly the children dying in vast numbers every day. Mr. Cohen and his friends at the BBC, well, we're not really interested. What do you make of these people?
Well, you know, that's funny. We'll see how bad staff morale is if you attend one of the BBC Christmas parties coming up in the next few weeks. But if you're not lucky enough to be splurging there, you can see that, you know, if the BBC was truly doing its job, obviously the true story in Syria will be born out of events that are going to take place right now as we speak. But you know what we saw back in August and September was really an absolute drive and insistence upon military intervention.
They were selling it. They were absolutely selling it. I'll just call this up. You've mentioned Christmas parties. So the BBC can't report the truth of what's going on in Syria. We're not interested in people dying. What we are interested in is basically pumping out, the complaint here is that they're pumping out the same old stuff over Christmas. This is dumbing down, but isn't it interesting that to produce something that's relatively light-hearted on Christmas television, we've got to go back in time. And what this is saying to me, just continuing the theme of applied behavioural psychology, of course, in particular BBC's television these days is so dark and depressing and violent that they have to go back in time to get programmes that are actually going to lift people up in any way.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to be watching this Christmas.
Well, you're not the only one, actually. So, Stop the War Coalition would appear to be sort of a timely thing to talk about. What's been going on here? Well,
we just wanted to, highlight what happened this past weekend in London, the International Anti-War Conference, and Obviously, they were selling tickets to this one. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's a bit of a controversy with this particular event. And Tony Benn did speak. He's very, very elderly, very frail at the moment as well. And he gave a rousing speech. Always impressive, Tony Benn, when he takes to the podium.
He has got the statesman about him, hasn't he?
Yeah,
we may not agree with all his views.
That's right.
Yeah.
Tony Blair does have an air of a statesman about him.
Tony Benn.
Tony Benn, sorry.
Sorry, that was a very bad Freudian slip there. We're going to apologise to Mr. Benn on that.
I was thinking about a holiday in Marrakesh. But anyway, getting back to that. So Stop the War Coalition, Sister Agnes from Syria. This is a Catholic nun who basically debunked a lot of the open source reporting that was being touted by the Foreign Office and the White House in the run-up to the possible war with Syria. These were YouTube videos of Syrian children who had been victims of chemical weapons. And Sister Agnes' parents came to her and said, those are my kids, but they weren't in that area of Damascus. They had died somewhere else.
Yeah.
Or my children had been missing for 6 months. They'd been abducted, kidnapped. So there's something fishy going on with this chemical weapons story.
We're not saying that people hadn't died because we were shown the bodies of these children.
In YouTube videos.
We were saying, where did they die?
So Sister Agnes was invited by Stop the War Coalition to be a keynote speaker. And these two gentlemen, Owen Jones, the young man. Young chappie.
On the left.
With the blonde hair. He writes for The Independent. He is a self-proclaimed socialist and with, somewhat of a Marxist background. And that's not an exaggeration, by the way.
I've seen him interviewed on TV and he's absolutely been defending the Marxist position. When he was asked about the body count of tens of millions, 30 million, 60 million as a result of the application of Marxism, he didn't actually have an answer of that. He looks about 16, but apparently he's being groomed as one of Ed Miliband's boys. Yeah, can we just bring it back on there, Mike?
Okay, Owen Jones, he was also a keynote speaker, and this gentleman is an American gentleman, Jeremy Scahill, who made his name with Democracy Now!, the foundation-funded sort of left-wing media outlet, who has a documentary film out, So It Happens, this weekend, called The Dirty Wars, which premiered in London. And both Jeremy Scahill and Owen Jones threatened publicly to pull out of Stop the War Coalition's conference if Mother Agnes was allowed to speak and present her findings. And so she then stepped down because she didn't want to be part of the controversy and kind of let everybody off the hook. But neither of them gave really a justification as to why they took that stance. And of course, you can share your attempt to ask Stop the War Coalition what was the reason behind this. Did they agree? Because to me, it's strange that an organization would allow two speakers, high-profile speakers, to bully a not-so-high-profile speaker from having a platform. Yeah. That to me is very odd, and that smelled very fishy from the onset, and very few people have been willing to question this, except for Jonathan Cook and some other prominent bloggers who've done it. Yeah. Who've done it. So I think this is a very dangerous precedent. Now, why would they want to keep her from speaking? One can only say it has something to do with her investigation, and something in her investigation runs contrary to Owen Jones and Jeremy Scahill. It's possible that Jeremy Scahill might be working on perhaps a follow-up to his Oscar-nominating documentary, Dirty Wars, maybe to do with chemical weapons, maybe to do with regime change in Syria, but there's some kind of PR problem. I tried to contact the PR company and ask them about a statement from Scahill, and they didn't even reply. Yeah. And I don't know what your...
Well, we can bring it up if it just pop that one back on screen, if you will, Mike. Basically, we first of all phoned up Stop the War Coalition, and when we asked had they got a statement about these two men stepping down, they referred us to their website where there was a statement, but it was very woolly. what we actually said is, well, would they give Mother Agnes a platform to speak in the future? Well, they didn't reply then. They said send in an email, which we did. We had to chase that today. And then Stop the War Coalition were very wobbly on the phone, but they said it's impossible to say. So I said, well, doesn't this really show bias that these two men, who I believe both of these people are pretty, we'll say they're well connected politically, versus Mother Agnes. You've said it. Why are these people so frightened of this lady? It's got to be this, isn't it? She's got to be talking about stuff that these two men are frightened to go near.
Well, both Owen Jones and Jeremy Scahill then are, what I can see is they're defending the state, the line of the state.
Yeah.
The U.S. State Department and the British Foreign Office, which their line was Assad let off these chemical weapons in Ghouta back in August, and that was the justification for military intervention. Those two are, in effect, defending their government's lines very quietly and very indirectly. But you can see with the left-wing media, and these aren't press. Okay, we're talking about media. There's a difference.
Well, Owen Jones is very interesting, isn't it? Because he is a young lad that's come out of nowhere. Who is this? Who is this man? He's invited onto the BBC.
He's on Question Time.
He's no experience. He's certainly got no life experience. He seems to be a mentored young lad. I'm going to call him a lad because I'm getting to that age now. And so where's he come from?
He's really there to inject some young blood, some new blood into the sort of the left wing.
Right.
And also you'll find that Owen Jones and Jeremy Scahill are kind of this new breed of activist, who kind of in a way masquerading as journalists.
Yeah.
But they're really very, very well situated within the establishment. I'm going to call that, Brian, the executive. When you've been promoted to the executive level and you're given opportunities like Question Time and so forth. So they definitely suit a certain side of that. But you have to look at what's behind Jeremy Scahill and Democracy Now! This is the foundation.
Come into this one?
Yeah, well, we'll go to that in a second. But you have organizations like MoveOn.org.
Yeah.
And from there you have Change.org. Now, Change.org is a for-profit company, by the way. They're not for profit. The ORG on the end is very deceptive. But that was Change.org was really this is how they were founded, to create an index of crowdsourced ideas for the implementation by incoming President Barack Obama in 2008. That is the provenance of Change.org.
So at the moment, we've got many people who would consider themselves to be activists, and they're actually picking up on this sort of organisation. They get an email through from Change.org. We get them on a regular basis. People are thinking, thank goodness there's somebody here driving through some common sense. So you get involved, and actually what's happened is you've been sucked into the very organisation we should all be trying to stop.
So Democracy Now!, which is very popular, they're woven into these foundations with Change.org, Avaz.
38 Degrees.
38 Degrees. There's this nexus of left-wing foundation-funded organizations that look to be very nonpartisan and look to be very innocuous. But in fact, the connections are absolutely incredible. We're going to bring up an old flow chart. This is from 2005, and you can see at the top, you have the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Central Intelligence Agency, and of course the Carlyle Group, which is really you have the Bush family and the Saudi Arabian families involved in the Carlyle Group, and then you have George Soros, and you have the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, Carnegie, and then you can see all the different left-wing websites that trail down from these different organizations. And the bottom line here, Brian, is that the establishment has funded both sides of the left and the right paradigm.
Of course, if you control all horses in the race, you're on a winner, aren't you?
I could easily do a right-wing flow chart of the same, and you'll see some of the same players and the same money flowing to the right-wing media organizations. Okay, and there's plenty of them. This is just about the sort of democratically oriented or left wing. So, for instance, if you're then the Nation is another interesting one. This is Jeremy Scahill's.
So that's bottom right, is it? You're talking about
sure,
there?
that was taken over by the American Jewish Congress in the 1940s with the explicit job of really promoting for the creation of the State of Israel. And of course, you can look at the sort of things that they cover and issues, the stances they take, but they're intricately connected with Democracy Now! And you have this exchange going with other organizations here that are quite big brands now. And of course, we have bigger brands, like corporate brands like MSNBC, involved in across laterally with these institutions. But it is incredible to look at where the money flows and, of course, where the influence flows.
Yeah.
And money is used to buy influence on the certain parts of the agenda. Yeah.
Sorry, Mike, yes.
No, I was just going to say regarding the Carlyle Group, let's not forget John Major, because of course he's chief executive of the European branch of the Carlyle Group. Mm-hmm. So we got to include people from this side of the Atlantic in that particular organisation as well.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting that on this one we've got primarily a left-wing focus, so we've got left-wing believers who are sucking money from unbelievably wealthy and powerful people who you think they'd be looking at them and saying, well, these guys are the problem in the first place.
Yeah, and so you have like Michael Moore, traditional left-wing aligned mainstream characters like Michael Moore and Amy Goodman with Democracy Now! Who were able to kind of let loose at the Bush administration in America. And what did they achieve in 8 years? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
They didn't slow down foreign policy at all. In fact, what a lot of those people didn't do is there are certain no-go areas on their attack target list, and mainly those are things happening within the United States. Mm. So it's great to go and expose things over in theaters of war after they've already happened.
Yeah.
But it's one thing to really hold your leadership to account in your country while it's happening. And that's one of the criticisms of what people would call a controlled opposition. So it does give the public a steam valve to vent.
But it doesn't take them anywhere.
It doesn't take them anywhere.
Well, if we're continuing the theme, we're into the sort of Middle East here at the moment. We've been talking about Syria. We just bring this up to show people that the information is available. So Directory of Social Change, Information, and here's the word, and training for the voluntary sector, big society in the Middle East. Could big society be both cause and cure of the Arab revolutions? Now, this is starting to really give us a look. This is May 2011. Who was doing what behind the scenes to actually cause trouble? A lot of the text is about the benefits, but if you read this document, you'll also see that they're actually very strongly talking about unrest. It says in the middle here, it should be of some concern that civic engagement seems to be largely in decline across the Arab region. Now, remember, in the common purpose, I'm not talking about the political charity common purpose, I'm talking about the wider political agenda common purpose. The moment you can identify a gap between the legitimate government and the people, that's where you get all your activists in. You then stir, and that starts the pack of trouble coming. So we know that BBC Media Action is doing the same thing. It's getting BBC political people into very unstable countries, supposedly to help them set up democratic media. What's the BBC really doing? Well, it's obvious that the tentacles of the BBC octopus are now crawling into a variety of countries, whether it's Nigeria or Somalia, or Syria, for example, Palestine. It's
agenda-driven media, which is focused on projecting soft power through agenda-driven media. This is not press. This is not reporting as the traditional function of that column of the matrix. But this is something else. This is media. And it's not the same as press, and that's what people need to really be able to distinguish between the two. If you have a partisan agenda, you're not press, you're media.
Media, yeah.
Yeah, and it means there's a group of interests behind you helping to propel your organization, and that is not legitimate non-biased press, that is media. It's partisan media.
So we're going to leave that subject there, but we're going to say that if you are living in the Middle East and you are beginning to question the version of events that's not only coming perhaps from your own local media, but that's coming from the so-called trustworthy BBC and Western media, what we're trying to do is to get you to focus on who's really driving that media and who is amongst your society causing trouble. I'll just add there that when Putin expresses his concerns about organisations and non-government organisations working in Russia, this is some of the tension which I think he's slowly becoming aware of.
Yeah, and Egypt as well.
Absolutely.
Cleaned house 2 years ago over Christmas and arrested people from U.S. democracy NGOs, yes, who are trying to promote democracy in Egypt. So a lot of countries and people are becoming wise to this kind of subterfuge.
Yeah, or Peter Tatchell going into Russia and saying, you need to adopt policies that I tell you. What arrogance, just unbelievable. Well, apparently there's been a death. It's a wonder we've got any news for you today because, my goodness, the newspapers and mainstream media are covered with Nelson Mandela everywhere we go. It goes on and on. But this is where it really became appalling. The Express is trying to tell us here that BBC newsreader Hugh Edwards had to hold back tears as he broke the news of Nelson Mandela's death. So he wasn't shedding tears over the tens of thousands of children who've died in Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or Syria, but Nelson Mandela has died, and so BBC is crying. I think these are crocodile tears. What can you tell us about what's going on, Mike?
Well, of course, David Cameron said a great light has gone out in the world. And really, Louise pointed us at something today that I had to have a quick look at because it seemed like there was a certain amount of hypocrisy in these words. Well, we'll just start off with this article because this is going back, I think, to 2009, but pretty hard-hitting article in the Mirror, really accusing Cameron of being an absolute hypocrite for naming Nelson Mandela as his personal hero. Now, we know that David Cameron was sort of what could you say? He was certainly Margaret Thatcher's poster boy at the time, and we know what Margaret Thatcher thought of Mandela at the time. And Cameron subsequently thought it was important to try to distance himself from Thatcher's views on this particular issue. But really, this hypocrisy allegation is with regard to the fact that while Mandela was still in prison, he was in his 26th year in prison in South Africa. Cameron was heading over to South Africa on a junket at the in the arms of the South African elite at the time. I mean, I don't know whether it was snowing over there or what, but he was certainly having some fun. But then it was really this article which is referring to a Facebook post, which is really, again, calling David Cameron a hypocrite because they're pointing out that the Facebook post accuses David Cameron of having been involved with the production of this particular poster here saying "Hang Nelson Mandela." And this poster came out as a response to the song "Free Nelson Mandela," if you remember that song at the time. And this article in Descrier here is really saying at the end of the day that there's no evidence that he was directly involved with it, but nonetheless we'll have a look at why this allegation was being made in the first place. And the allegation is being made because Cameron, along with many others, was a member of the Federation of Conservative Students, and this is an organisation. This is taken from the Conservative Home blog. It's still there, this page, if you want to go and have a look at it. It isn't one of the ones that was pulled down as a result of the recent purge. And we just read a few of the lines here. If the militant tendency was Labour's 1980s loony left, the Federation of Conservative Students was the Conservatives' loony right, albeit on a much smaller scale. Radio 4 has just broadcast a second of two 15-minute reflections on the Federation of Conservative Students, presented by the Times columnist Tim Haines, A burst of freedom highlighted some of the Federation's enthusiasms, one of them being the legalization of heroin and prostitution, the likening of Holy Communion to cannibalism, and the unlimited migration into and out of Britain. So I wanted to highlight this particular post because actually some of the comments underneath it were of interest and of relevance to whether Cameron was directly involved with this poster or not. And so here we have a point here because one of the questions was, this was clearly something from the 1980s and it shouldn't really apply in modern day conservatism, should it? But this post here pointing out in 2006 that actually if you are involved with this organisation, Conservative Future, which is the replacement for the Federation, that in fact that this kind of thing is still going on at their meetings in certain universities. Okay. The next post here, it says, this is actually from Guido Fawkes of the Guido Fawkes blog, and he was also a member of this organisation. And he's saying here, if you're not going to go over the top when you're a student, when are you going to do so? Looney, some of the FCS cadre were bonkers, some were brilliant. It was always a lot of fun. Do I regret any of it? Not really. I wore my blue star with pride. But further on down the list of comments then, somebody else, also a member, points out, well, all this talk of the old days, just for the record, it was Guido who did the T-shirts, and Cameron's chief speechwriter was on the FCS National Committee, along with McGregor et al. FCS gets to write the speeches, and the Wets, like Nick Robinson, get to read them out on TV. So there you go. It's not definitive that David Cameron had anything to do with it directly. Nonetheless, he was involved in that organisation at the time. There's definite hypocrisy involved in the crocodile tears for him. Sorry, I do apologise. Yeah. So, what more is there to be said? It's not definitive, but, we can't really let him get away with this, can we?
No, and we do that by talking about it and, well, I'm shaking my head because it really is becoming so appalling what's going on. It's getting more and more obvious to see what's happening. We need to deal with these people. They've got to be properly removed from Parliament, and then we can start to rebuild the country. But this article made me very, very angry. This is Independent, and look at the headline here. It's the Royal Marine who's now been named as Sergeant Alexander Blackman. So let's see how they do this. Guilty of murdering an Afghan insurgent, awaiting sentence and now named Sergeant Alexander Blackman, the Marine murderer. Now, in making this comment, we in no way detract from the fact that I'm sure a very brave Afghan insurgent has died as a result of this man's action. But we want to just draw people's attention to the sort of thing that's really going on here. This is what the paper said. He wanted his identity to remain secret to serve his punishment for a battlefield execution under the protective legal alias of Marine A. On Friday, Sergeant Alexander Blackman will be sentenced for the murder of an injured Afghan prisoner, with his real name now forever linked to one of the most brutal stories to emerge from Britain's Asian conflicts. Now, I've got to say that the ending of that paragraph is just has got to be complete nonsense, because if we look across the spectrum of wars that Britain has not only started and fought, we can be sure that the most horrific atrocities have been carried out. We can have a discussion about that. But here is the Independent absolutely lining up against this man. None of these journalists will be required to fight on the battlefield. But who's really to blame for what's going on? It surely must come back to these individuals. The men responsible for the conflict in the first place, so the innocent Afghan men, women and children who've died. And I think even our own military would respect the bravery of Afghan troops ranged against them. But these men, Brown, Clegg, Miliband, Cameron, and of course Blair, are ultimately the people who are responsible for the death and destruction and this horrific incident with Sergeant Blackman. Well, how do these people see themselves? Well, as low empathy individuals. Of course, we could not get a better example today than this man. So here is David Cameron. He could almost be the local vicar preparing a sermon with the candles gently lit and the soft background and the flowers. Is that an angel sitting on top of the bunch of flowers, or is it a demon? Well, I think it's probably the demon. But King David here, an utter hypocrite, helped into his leadership position of the Tories by an ex-international arms dealer and billionaire. I mean, speechless, really.
Well, there's this drive to demoralize the military in this country.
Oh, this is,
and in America as well, massively. And so these same people, this kind of a liberalism agenda, but these same politicians who might have been wringing their hands at the prospect of a war this year or the year before, because they can capitalize off that war, they can extract political capital and curry favor.
As Margaret Thatcher did with the Falklands, of course.
Exactly. So, and here, to me it makes, to call a British soldier, yes, okay, this person got murdered in the battlefield, but is this a drop in the bucket compared to what went on in Basra for 10 years, and also what went on in Afghanistan with British troops and American troops under the NATO banner, and foreign troops as well. So I don't really understand how the press can make a meal out of this story, considering what's gone on for the last 12 years.
Well, I'm going to say applied behavioural psychology, because what this is going to do to people's minds on the battlefield, they've already got rules of engagement. You've got to look at a book. Can I do this? You're trying to return fire. It's designed to mess people's minds up. Hypocrisy. Tonight, 6 o'clock, we've got Doomwatch. And is this you, or is this Seagal?
I don't know. That's me. So yes, I'll be on with the host Alex G. With his absolutely outstanding radio program run out of Peterborough FM called Doomwatch. We're going to be talking about a lot of important issues tonight, and one of them is going to be the rise of the community organizer.
Excellent.
We're going to get into the psychology of the community organizer and why we're seeing all these people and organizations sprouting up out of nowhere in the last 5 or 6 years, and what it's all about and where they want to take us, among other things.
Brilliant. Well, we hope that we will be receiving detailed information from South Wales on this subject, because there's been a lot of very good research done, and as you can see, the scene is now being set for really understanding what Alinsky's big society is in Britain. So we're going to be moving on to that. Before we leave you today, the answer to the question, do you get seasick on a submerged submarine? No, you don't. I'll add to that, I'm not a submariner. I have done a couple of trips on submarines, but the answer to the question is you don't get seasick. Also, viewers and listeners, if you haven't visited 21st Century Wire, Patrick's site, you might like to do that. Very good information, amongst others, on the Middle East, and we're going to continue to focus on the disaster area in Syria as a result of British and American politics and others in the background. Thanks for joining us, and if you've got a flooded home, we hope that you manage to get that sorted out as soon as possible. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.